Look, thanks for having me today. A pleasure to be talking about Peel Mining and the company's aspirations. So Peel is all about trying to become the next base metal development company, copper-centric in the Cobar Basin in Western New South Wales. Next slide, next couple of slides, please. We'll run through that. So corporate snapshot. So we've got about 420 million shares on issue. That follows a recent capital raising where we raised just over $20 million. Cash at the end of the quarter was about $20 million with a little bit more cash coming in after the quarter. But that's about our net position at the moment. Market cap at the moment around $130 million. Some interesting major shareholders. Hampton Hill Mining and Associates is really a gentleman who sits behind that company and is a stalwart in support of our ventures. St Barbara Limited are also on our register, just under 10%, and directors certainly have skin in the game at around 9%. And Paradise Investments recently became a substantial shareholder in the company. A four-man board, myself and Jim Simpson, technical expertise. So I'm a geologist by training, exploration, geology, primarily in gold and base metals. And Jim Simpson joined us sort of coming up to 2 years ago, and Jim has fantastic credentials in base metal mining operations. Next slide, please. So our land position in the Cobar Basin. The Cobar Basin is around 8 hours drive west of Sydney. It's a fantastic jurisdiction in which to operate, world-class mining district, and certainly after Broken Hill, pretty much the most important part of New South Wales in terms of base and precious metal mining. You can see the basin's endowment, really significant gold and base metal production, gold, silver and base metal production. Our land position is in the central and southern parts of the Cobar Basin. It's an easy place to work, as I mentioned. There are very large land holdings out there, 20,000 to 100,000 acre properties, pastoral country, fantastic road network to get around on. And we also have the Moomba to Sydney gas pipeline. And just up the road is the mining centre of Cobar, which has a number of operating mines around it. Our deposits, which we've discovered over a sort of a 10-year duration that we've been operating in the Cobar Basin. The main deposits, Mallee Bull, Wirlong, Southern NIGHTS-WAGGA and Mayday. Mallee Bull we discovered around 8 years ago. It's a copper-rich deposit. We're drilling there now to upgrade that resource. We're also drilling for a maiden resource at Wirlong, which is a copper-rich system. And then Southern NIGHTS-WAGGA, which we discovered about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. The Southern Nights part of it is a zinc, lead, silver rich system. And then Mayday is a gold rich system. And essentially the Cobar Basin can be thought of as a VMS camp for the geologically minded. And we're proposing a sort of a hub and spoke strategy. Next slide, please. So look, copper's time is now. When I initially put this slide together about a year ago, the copper price was still to move, but the fundamentals behind copper are extraordinary. Basically, we aren't replacing, that is on a global level, we're not replacing the copper that we're consuming with new discoveries. And the demand side is really just starting to crank up now. It's a large market, a deep market, about 20 million tonnes of demand a year. And we foresaw, going back at sort of a year or so ago, even before that, that there was likely to be a need for a higher price to bring on the new supply that's needed for the decarbonisation of the world. And obviously the copper price has moved significantly over the last 6 months or so. Next slide, please. So last year was a year of consolidation for Peel Mining. So we had a number of joint ventures that concluded last year. We bought one out and the other one the other partner withdrew. But as a result of the consolidation of our assets through reacquiring 100% of everything, our exposure to copper grew, as well as our relative resource base. So this slide was put together pre the copper price movement over the last 6 months. So copper was already our largest, I guess, economic exposure in terms of metals. But with the copper price movement, I suspect the relative portion of copper is closer to 50% now. And that is without the addition of a Wirlong copper resource, which is in the works at the moment. So looking at our resources on the next slide. So this is our current resource base. We have about 13 million tonnes of global resource amongst sort of, I guess, the 4 deposits that we have at hand at the moment. Mallee Bull, obviously a copper-rich resource and certainly one of Australia's highest grade undeveloped copper resources. But then cumulatively, we obviously have significant zinc, lead, silver and gold mineralisation in our asset base. We're aiming to add Wirlong by around the end of the September quarter to this graph or this table. And with that, I guess we're hoping that obviously the global resource base will increase, but certainly our exposure to copper will also increase further. Next slide, please. So our plans, our aspirations pivot around this hub and spoke strategy, which is pretty common for, as I mentioned, VMS fields, which is essentially a central milling facility that is sustained through satellite deposits and I guess any deposits that can be parked next to the mill or the mill parked next to them. And essentially what we're looking at is we're aiming for hopefully around 1 million tonne per annum sort of mark is our goal internally as a throughput rate, and that mill being supported by our deposits that we've discovered to date and are still, I guess, defining to get to a critical mass of indicated resource so that we can publish a detailed scoping study. So we've completed the drill out on May Day. We're drilling for maiden resource at Wirlong, and we're upgrading our resource at Mallee Bull at the moment. And time permitting, we'll certainly be looking to upgrade the resource at Southern Nights at the end of the year. Next slide. So what does the potential or conceptual mill look like? Well, this is a flow sheet that GR Engineering put together for us based off our aspirations. It's a pretty standard flow sheet for a polymetallic deposit or polymetallic deposits. Essentially, it allows for the recovery or exploitation of all the metals, economic metals that we see. And so usually, it's a crush and grind comminution circuit, and then gravity gold set or gravity recovery for any precious metals that we can achieve there, and then sequential flotation with a gold circuit at the back. We've done some ore sorting test work, and it looks like our deposits, certainly the 2 we've tested, Mallee Bull and Southern Nights, are amenable to ore sorting. So we've got further test work planned over the back half of this year. But I'd make the point that this is sort of the dream mill, what we want eventually. It doesn't bring in ore sorting. We've updated this flow sheet since to include ore sorting. And I guess the other part of this is that this mill can be staged depending on the final optimization of our deposits. Next slide, please. So Wirlong, we're drilling here for a maiden high-grade copper resource. You can see some of that spectacular chalcopyrite-rich mineralisation in that photo on the right. It's a classic sort of Cobar style deposit, so a sort of pipe-like or chute-like structure. What we think is we've got multiple lenses, but essentially it starts quite shallow at around 60 metres below surface, some of the high-grade copper, and we've seen good widths of high-grade copper down to 600 metres below surface. We're drilling there now, and the next slide shows you some of the high-grade intercepts we've achieved since discovery and more recently since our resource definition drilling program commenced. So some spectacular numbers, certainly amongst the best copper results being reported in Australia at the moment. And we're very excited by the potential of this system. As an analogue, we see significant, or we see a lot of the traits of what's seen up in Cobar, particularly at CSA, applying to the style of mineralisation we're seeing here. So, you know, the CSA mine discovered in 1870, 150 years old, and been running as a modern mine for the last 50 years. And most of it was discovered below 800 metres below surface, and we're certainly nowhere near that depth at the moment. So we're very excited by the long-term potential for Wirlong. Looking at the next page, which is Mallee Bull. So Mallee Bull was our first discovery in the Cobar Basin, and again, it's a sort of a pipe-like structure. We own the land that sits above Mallee Bull, so 20,000 acres of essentially freehold land, which we bought a number of years ago. And we've got a substantial resource of just under 7 million tonnes at just under 2% copper here. The deeper parts of it, so sort of below 350 metres below surface, remain inferred, and that's a focus of our drilling at the moment. But certainly this deposit is open at depth and along strike. The next slide gives a bit of a long section view, and some of the historic hits that we produced during our discovery and subsequent drilling of the mineralisation at Mallee Bull. And as I mentioned, you know, very high grade resource overall, but some spectacular drill hits. The true width on these holes is sort of 30 to 40%, generally speaking, of those downhole intercepts. So still really substantial true widths. But spectacular mineralisation we saw in this deposit, and we're back there drilling now. So it would be fair to say that if history is a guide, we'll see some spectacular drill hole intercepts coming out of this over the next 3 to 6 months. Next slide, please. So Southern NIGHTS-WAGGA tank, sort of third string to the bow. It's essentially one mineral system, although two discrete deposits, hence the dual name. It's a substantial resource of about 5 million tonnes of mineralisation there that we ran through stope shape optimising to put together. So essentially it's a mineable resource, as we like to term it. So we've put it through the ringer to produce that resource. There's potential for open pittable mineralisation, but certainly when you look at the long section on the next slide, you can see the scale of this system is significant. It's open in all directions, and like most VMS deposits, they generally grow over time if you can sustain exploration. We certainly see every opportunity for this resource to grow into the future. There's some very high-grade mineralisation associated with this. And if you get the time to have a look back on some of our results, if you're unfamiliar with this, you'll see some spectacular drill hits came out of this as well. So it really is a great addition to our resource base in the Cobar Basin. The next deposit, Mayday. Look, this was where we first commenced exploration. It's a VMS system. Again, it's had the top of it mined off for a heap leach gold operation around 20 years ago. And there's a remnant resource there, but we've got a substantial high quality resource that was constrained by a pit optimisation and underground stope shape optimisation. We haven't drilled very deep here at all, only to about 280 metres below surface ourselves. And the next slide gives a long cross section through the deposit. And you can see the pit that constrains the conceptual pit constraining the resource. These are some of our resource drill out results. Certainly some great results in there, but it's a nice you know, addition to our resource base, and certainly the long-term potential is excellent here. So looking at our forward program on the next slide, look, abundant copper drill results over the next 6 months, 6 to 9 months. We'll have resource upgrades we'll have a maiden resource for Wirlong and a resource upgrade for Mallee Bull. And I anticipate we'll get a resource upgrade out for Southern NIGHTS-WAGGA Tank as well. All of that leading to the next slide, which is, where we want to be by the end of next year. So all this work taking place this year to put us in a position to deliver a concept study and then a pre-feasibility study by the back end of next year, in advance of hopefully submitting environmental impact statement and mining license applications for a new development. And that's the Peel story.